Good morning all. To start off, the heading that I was given for today was the changing landscape of the private rented sector, and I think it is very safe to say that the landscape is going to change more than any of us have seen in probably our lifetime, or certainly our time within the private rented sector. I want to try and start with a positive message. You could probably tell from the accent, I'm not local. I've travelled to you today from sunny South Wales, and I can show you picture evidence. When I left yesterday, the sun was shining, got gradually worse as I got towards London. But I was originally employed by the NRLA. I came back into the sector. I was originally employed by the NRLA to help landlords in Wales deal with the Renting Homes Wales Act. And the one thing I can promise you is that every concern that you have today about the Renters' Rights Bill was mirrored directly in Wales. We saw the good landlords through that process. We held their hand, we represented them in the Senedd, and we helped them. Because our biggest concern with what is now called the Renters' Rights Bill is that it forces good landlords out of the sector. It reduces the options and opportunities to tenants. It increases the opportunity for bad or rogue landlords that Paul used to expose on his television show. And that tenants are badly served by what a left-leaning government with a very large majority states they're trying to achieve. Now, as is mentioned in this slide, and for total honesty, this says 100,000, Paul mentioned 110, we have 109,500 members. We are a very loud voice when we sit around the table with decision makers who tell us what they think is right for the market. Because our fundamental starting point is that we want a better PRS for all, that's landlords and tenants, and we want a responsible sector that encourages good landlords to invest in something. And it was mentioned earlier, the PRS plays a very, very vital role in supporting a social housing sector that's been underfunded for 30 years. And it's slightly more complicated in Wales. We have two left-leaning parties. We have Plaid Cymru, we have Labour. Here you have Labour. I don't think anyone else quite goes that far left. But if they're going to tell you that the social housing network is the answer and you shouldn't exist, where's their 30 years of investment to make that happen? And it has been mentioned again this morning that the private rented sector actually provides better quality houses than the social housing sector. So what we're campaigning for is to stop the demonisation of good people who are providing good properties. Now, I was asked maybe to go through all of those. 10 minutes is not possible. And the Renters' Rights Bill itself is not possible in 10 minutes. So what I have thought I might try to do is try and mop up the little bits that haven't been able to be covered. This would take 3 days to talk. If you want to come and sit in a room for 3 days, we can go through every aspect of it. It's not possible. So we will try and stick to the important parts. The most important part, again, this was mirrored in Wales. When we enter the brave new world, when we go into the Renters' Rights Bill, what about the tenancies that you signed 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago? They're gone. There's no grandfathering in of the tenancies that you've had. When the brave new world starts, every right that's covered by the Renters' Rights Bill will kick into place. So you can't get around that. There's no, and you just mentioned about schemes trying to get around taxes. There's no route around this. We will be living under the Renters' Rights Bill when it is implemented. And has been mentioned, we haven't got the date. We are looking at early summer, around about 6 months from the date when it will first be allowed to be discussed in Parliament on the 9th of October. It has also been mentioned that there was a lot of to and fro in with the Renters' Reform Bill, as it was called. And I was at an event in East London where our Chief Executive, Ben Beadle, was stood, very similar to this, talking about what would happen if a general election was called at exactly the same moment that Rishi Sunak was stood in the pouring rain announcing a general election. And it was one of those thick of it moments where you wanted a crook to pull him off the stage because everything he was presenting was out of date from that exact moment, because we all knew the outcome of the general election. I know a couple of MPs got into trouble for voting on it, for gambling on it, but we all knew where it was going. We all knew this was coming. And our head of policy, Chris Norris, kind of threw his papers in the air when it didn't make it through the wash-up, when he spent 5 years of his professional life working on a bill that didn't come forward. But fundamentally, the bills aren't that much different. There are a couple of differences, and our WAB's law has been mentioned. You will have a responsibility over damp and mould, whereas that was only going to be in the social housing sector before now. But those are the timelines. Summer 2025, kind of your key thing. We are working at the moment on, we have mentioned training, we're working on a training module on the Renters' Rights Bill that we hope will be ready in early January. That will become available. And it is something I know that when we have the question and answer, the panel shortly, education is key. What was key again in Wales, I know I keep referring to Wales, but that's kind of our closest case study because it was only just under 3 years ago. Good landlords unintentionally making bad decisions because they didn't get the full information through. I don't think anybody, if you dedicated today to come and sit in this room and listen, none of you are going to go out there and intentionally break the law. But what you're going to have to do is to make sure that you are fully educated, fully up to date. And I'm not here to sell. If any of you want to join the NRLA, myself and my colleagues are outside. What we do, every single document that's on our website, on the day you're looking at it, will be lawful and up to date. The day the law changed, the document will change. We've just rebranded and we didn't steal your branding. I promise you, we did not steal your branding, but we have rebranded. We've just rebranded, I don't know, there's 3,000 documents on our website. We've rebranded the lot. But every document that you have access to as a member will be lawful and up to date. The key message I will say to you, when the landscape changes, keep ahead of it. Educate yourself, get yourself trained, go to free webinars. We ran a webinar 2 weeks ago now, 1,700 people turned up for a free webinar. And what's key about our webinars is you're listening to people who are in the room talking to these ministers. You're listening to the most senior civil servant who is working on the bill. If you want to be ahead of the game, get to our webinars. They are free to attend. Again, it's not selling, but when we say we want a better PRS, that's what we're working towards. I'm going to try and rush through these. I've already had the 2 minutes. I'm only on my third slide. I think all of these, to be fair, have been covered, so there's no point going over them. The one thing that hasn't been mentioned is the ban on discrimination. It's a big, big thing. But as Paul mentioned at the start, if you've got 20 people applying for a property, you're going to choose the best one. So they can't tell you that you can't discriminate and then not provide enough houses to the sector. I'm talking to councils around the country. I'm talking to councils that have millions of pounds a year going into temporary accommodation. We've moved from a housing shortage to a housing crisis, and one council last week told me they're in the centre of a housing catastrophe. Now that doesn't get fixed by penalising you guys. That gets fixed with some fundamental changes of government. But whilst we're in there, you can't legally discriminate, but you will choose the best person for you. I don't know what the difference is. The bidding wars, it has been mentioned, but that's just going to raise rents on your advertising. If you can't take more than you advertise, then you're going to advertise for more. This is an interesting one. In a Labour conference where they had nothing to announce, Ed Miliband took it upon himself to just announce fresh out of nowhere that they were going to bring back in the EPCCs. I think I'm still on, yeah. It's just been announced on our website this morning. And again, this is about the education and keeping up to date. There has now been a fund announced to help landlords where you're renting to those who are on lower earnings. That's been announced on our website this morning. I tried to get a message to our head of policy to find out if I could give you some details. I don't have it. But keep up to date, guys, because I don't think they make a policy on the hoof, but it certainly seems that way a lot of times. Damp and mould, you will be now liable and responsible for that. We do offer training on that. We do work in partnership with organisations like Safe Suffolk on delivering those. But again, that's already been covered. Licensing, always a good topic of conversation. We're not a fan of them. Where they're in place, we will work with them. We'll work with the local authority to try and make sure that we're educating you within the restrictions of the licensing that's local to you. And that's about it, really. Our membership is £99 a year. If you want 10% off at B&Q, or as my wife calls it, if you want to buy 10% more at B&Q, that's just one benefit. It's a landlord community. We need to remain together. We need to remain strong. If you want your voice to be heard in Parliament, if you want your representation to be made, become part of what will shortly become 110,000 other members, and come and speak to us. I'll even give you £15 discount if you become a member. Thank you, guys.